slide, Cinda. The basics about feeding, as I said, I'm not going to go into nutritional levels of each species, but this is one of your jobs, is to learn what the requirements are of your species, whatever you're raising. Alpacas, horses, sheep, goats. Feed will most likely be your one largest expense. That's a given. So it's a good idea, not only because of the expense, but for the health of the animal, to feed for the stage of production. And we got to start somewhere, so I picked pre-breeding. Before breeding season, it's a good idea, and it's very helpful in terms of helping the female to drop more eggs, increase the nutrition before breeding and during breeding. During gestation, it's generally a good idea to just keep the feed at that same level until the last trimester, whenever that is with your species. The last 1/3 of their pregnancy, the fetuses start putting tremendous demands on the mother's body. You need to feed her more to make sure she can meet the needs of the baby and maintain her own condition. So her body, the idea is her body stays on an even keel all throughout her cycle. You feed her more when she needs it, you feed her less when she doesn't need it. So we're through gestation, then there's birth. And lactation is the time when there's the most nutritional demand on the mother, when she's nursing her babies. So that's when you're going to save your really good feed, say your leafiest, greenest alfalfa hay, grain if you're going to feed some grain, fresh pasture, lush green pasture. But boy, you want to get the nutrition to her when she's making all that milk for those kids, because that good feed is going to translate to the superior health in those babies and as they mature and start making their own. The last stage of production is maintenance, when she's finished nursing and before you breed her again, or if it's an animal that you're not breeding, they're on maintenance. They do not need this extra feed. You might want to give them a little more when it's below 0, like it was a couple of weeks ago here. But as a general rule, just a maintenance ration, keep it all the same, keep their weight the same. Next slide, Cinda. Along the lines of feeding basics, if you're going to feed hay, it's really important to learn to know what good hay is. And I've given you a link to a really excellent publication. It's a small one, but it lists the 5 or so major things to look for when you're evaluating hay. One of the most important ones is, and it's a general rule, that green hay is the best. Bright green hay is generally has the highest nutritional value. Another extremely important element in evaluating hay is the smell. Does it smell moldy? If it was put up too wet and the interior of the bale was wet, mold is going to form, and mold can kill your animals. You do not want mold in your hay. And you know, the way to find out is just tell the hay grower, I need to break open a couple of bales and look at the inside of this bale. Look at it, look at the color, look to see what kind of weeds are in there, because know that any weeds you bring onto your farm and run through your animals are probably going to come to live on your farm. How the farmer manages his or her weeds is an important question to ask. I personally, I literally interview a new hay person before I buy hay from them. One of my questions is always, before I even go to their place and look at their hay, it's, what kind of weeds do you have? And leave it open-ended questions like that. And how do you manage it? And I personally prefer to buy from farmers who do what's called spot spraying. They'll go around and just spray weeds as they see them, rather than blanket spray the entire field with an herbicide. Since organically raised hay is, in our area, extremely hard to find and very expensive if you do find it, this is the second best choice. This is the best that I can do. And then I go to the farm, I look at the hay, and I break open a bale, and I literally stick my nose in it. And if I feel little mold spores, if it smells moldy, ugh, it's repulsive to me, and I don't want to feed it to my animals. So I'll ask to look at another bale, maybe even 3 bales, and get a real strong sense that, okay, this is not moldy hay. Okay. Um, Sometimes you'll see hay that's brown on the outside and think, ugh. Well, it's possible that it's wonderful hay, but it just sat out in the windrows a little bit, or in the windrows or as bales in the field a little too long before it was picked up. So ask the farmer about that. Tell him, this looks pretty brown. What happened? And then open up a bale. And if it's bright green on the inside, you're good. Of course, the outside of every bale that is brown, there's that amount of hay that's not primo, but you'll have to make a choice about that. But the point is, don't judge a bale of hay by its cover. Another way in the beginning years of trying to learn how to evaluate good hay is I might suggest you go to your local fair. And if they have competitions for hay, which many of them do, go look at the hay samples that have gotten blue ribbons and the ones that haven't. That'll teach you a lot just right there. Another option is forage testing. Frankly, not a lot of farmers do test their hay for nutrient values. It's expensive and it's a pain. You could have after you buy it, you could have your hay tested, then, decide if you want to feed it or not. But I think that's certainly an option, and that web link I gave you is a good one. It's the Association of Forage Testing Labs, and there's a long listing throughout the country of labs. But you need to go out and just spend the time to learn how to evaluate your own hay, to know what you're feeding. Your animals don't have a choice. You have to make these good choices for them. Next slide, Cinda. The next thing I wanted to talk about is complete or packaged feeds. You see them in the feed stores. Sheep feed, goat feed, cattle feed, horse feed, and it's usually a combination of grains with maybe a vitamin mineral package. That's fine if you've decided you want to feed your animal grains. The only thing I really want to say about that is read the label, because some of them, a surprising number of them, are medicated. And that's a decision you'll want to make, of course. Do I have a reason to feed my animals a low level of antibiotic or coccidiostat every single day? I'm not telling you what you should do or shouldn't do, but just be aware that many feeds are medicated, especially in the chicken feed world. Salt and minerals are critical. Hay, grain if you're going to do it, and salt and minerals. Now, depending on your species, there are mineral mixes made especially for them, because different species have different mineral requirements. And sometimes it's really important because, for example, in the example of sheep require literally no additional copper from what they get from their feed naturally. So you do not want to give them a mineral mix that contains additional copper. So look at the bags. And a mineral mix also is often designed for the locale. Here in the Northwest, we have a shortage of selenium in our soils. So that means hay that's grown in the Northwest is low on selenium. So you want to buy minerals that have selenium added. And of course, clean fresh water, all that they can drink. Never restrict water. It should be provided free choice, unlimited. This is a nice tank, by the way. Next slide, Cinda. Next, I want to talk about farm biosecurity. Big word. It's very simple, really. It's just common sense. Run a closed herd is the best thing you can do. And that means simply your animals don't go anywhere and you bring minimal animals onto your farm. Now, some people may find this really simple. That's no problem. Other people, well, say you want to take your animals to a show. Well, okay, You need to make sure you vaccinate your animals against whatever is prevalent in your area, and your vet's going to help you with this. And when you bring them home from that show, you want to make sure you have a quarantine, a spot where you can quarantine them for a month to make sure they don't infect everybody else, all the rest of your animals. It can be done, people do it, but certainly running a closed herd is the best, meaning you don't rent out your breeding, say your breeding buck, a goat. You don't borrow your neighbor, well, maybe a trusted neighbor, but you don't rent one and bring him in. I mean, just think about that. I suggest you have visitors go through boot washes, a visitor who has been on another farm. Because, you know, this is something we never think about, but what do we track around on our feet? We track it in from another farm, we walk into our barn, our animals walk into it, boom, disease transmission. And don't wear your barn clothes to other farms. Don't bring your pathogens to their farm, because your animals have already developed immunity to whatever pathogens live on your farm. So you're going to be introducing something new to their farm, and you're going to be bringing home something that their animals have developed immunity to. When you do bring home new animals, worm them immediately. Worm them for internal parasites. Start out clean. Now I'm going to talk in much more depth a little bit later about internal parasites. And as I just said, have a separate place for those new arrivals. And what I always did when I brought home one new ram, because I needed to switch up my genetics, I had what I called a sacrificial wether. It never became a problem, but I had a wether that I would put in with that ram, since sheep are herd animals and a sheep alone is miserable. And that wether would spend a month in the quarantine area with the new ram until I was convinced that that new ram was totally healthy. I also urge you to make a plan to have an area for sick animals where you can quarantine them from everybody else. You don't necessarily have to have a separate space that you never use, but at least have a plan in mind of exactly what you're going to do if you go out to the barn tonight to feed and somebody is down, somebody's sick. Where am I going to put them to get them away from everybody else? Someplace that's easy for you to get to, someplace that's warm and dry, where you can put in clean bedding, but where they can't spread whatever they might have to the rest of your herd. The last item is, of course, manure management. Decide what you're going to do with it. You don't have to clean it every week or every month, but have a plan. Have a plan for moving it, and where are you going to pile it, where are you going to compost it away from where the animals live.